we move on into the next presentation by Johanne Miller. Could you start sharing your screen, and I will introduce you shortly. Johanne, are you with us? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. And Johanne is a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of West of Scotland, and she has a long history working with young people in various capacities. And she was a youth worker in the justice system for 10 years in Glasgow, Scotland, until completion of her PhD, which explored how young people grow in and out of gangs in Glasgow. Oh, gangs! Yeah, I always remember this Chicago work about gangs. Yeah, but this is not like mobs today. So yeah, like gangs. I'm very interested in this. For the last 10 years, she has been working with criminology, researching the lived experience of young people in the justice system in Scotland. And her latest project includes exploring the role of boredom in young people's life. Her latest research project is exploring the life experience of police custody and the impact of boredom has within the cells. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you very much for everybody's presentations. There's so much crossover, particularly I think that shutting down of consciousness when experiencing profound or existential boredom, it's been coming up again and again, and it's something that came up in my study, but I've not spoke about it within this presentation, but I found that really interesting, enjoyed it. So today I am going to talk to you about two studies regarding boredom and also tell the story of how I came to find boredom such an interesting and important field of study, particularly within the lives of young people within Scotland. So the first study was my PhD, which was a constructivist grounded theory of how young people moved in and out of gangs within Glasgow. It was carried out with 60 gang members across Glasgow that constituted 24 different gangs. And one of the middle range theories that emerged from it was called the boredom and the buzz. And I very much focused on the sensation-seeking side of it, which was the buzz, which was linked to the euphoria, the risk-taking, the violence that young people in gangs engaged in when they spoke about being bored. And I think in about 2017, I was doing a presentation sharing my findings from boredom and the buzz. And at the end of my presentation, a man put his hand up at the back of the classroom and said, "I don't believe it." And I asked him what he didn't believe. And he said that he didn't believe that young people stabbed each other because they were bored. He read books when he was bored. And for me, that was a bit of a light bulb moment because I realised that, first of all, people experienced boredom differently, and this man had never experienced the kind of mind-numbing, pervasive boredom that the young people I'd worked with had experienced. And also that I hadn't done my job properly because I hadn't portrayed that type of boredom properly. So following this presentation, I went back to the literature, to the criminology literature, to see, to find out what I could about boredom and the link between boredom and crime. And surprisingly, I found nothing, which is very surprising because the link between boredom and crime, particularly young people for over 100 years, particularly those in gangs, when asked why they did something, they say that they did it because they had nothing to do or they were bored. So this was quite shocking for me at this time. So I decided that I would go back and I would reanalyse the data set from my study again to pull out the boredom side of it rather than looking at the buzz side of it. And I searched much further afield within the literature so that I could properly explain the types of boredoms that were occurring with the young people. And the field of philosophy probably at that point in 2017 had the richest amount of knowledge on boredom. So I found Svenden's Typologies of Boredom, and this fit very well with explaining the types of boredom that the young people I had worked with had experienced. So you probably know this, but situative boredom is an emotion that contains a longing for something desired, and that can be fulfilled through activity. It's the type of boredom that most of us experience at various points in our lives, and I would argue it's hegemonic, that when we speak of boredom out with this society and conference, when we speak of boredom, this is the type of boredom most people assume that we are speaking of. Existential boredom is when there's that sense of disconnect with social life or withdrawal of meaning. Existential boredom depletes meaning in one's world to the point where they begin to question their own state of being. And using Svenden's typology really encapsulated the withdrawal of meaning and disconnect from society that the participants in the gangs experienced. And it enabled me to have a deeper theoretical understanding of what was happening at that nexus of boredom and risk-taking. So when I went back and reanalysed the data, the study showed that existential boredom was a part of the structural factors within the gang members' lives, including territorialism, lack of opportunities, lack of leisure, broken down transitions, and that this occurred over a period of years for the young people, and that this building of lack of experiences had the outcome, a very particular outcome for gang members, and that they began to embody their agency. And it was this embodiment of their agency that resulted in visceral time ruptures. So we all know the slowing of time is part of the epistemology of boredom and is linked with how we experience reality. In particular, in this study, they tended to get stuck in the present, and that's where that slowing of time occurs when related to boredom. And much of their time was spent trying to kill time, and this became a daily part of their existence. Time and temporality itself was experienced as a marker of exclusion for young people in gangs, and it was structured around expectations that they couldn't meet, like having a job or a routine, the working week, the 9 to 5, a leisure weekend, going out and engaging in activities at the weekend. So to avoid the pressure of these time markers, participants talked about staying up late, playing video games, sleeping during the day, or using substances like alcohol and cannabis. Cannabis in particular was especially common, and this was because it helped speed up the experience of time and made long, empty days feel more bearable. Under its influence, the usual pressures of time, like feeling that they should be doing something productive, faded into the background. For some, smoking weed was enjoyable and habitual, but for the majority, it was a coping mechanism used because there was simply nothing else to do. Participants often described a bad day as one where they were stuck at home, bored, and without anything to fill the time. But this didn't mean that they were actually doing nothing. It meant that the things that they were doing felt meaningless. Some, like Sean, expressed a desire to stop using drugs and do something active, but felt that there were no real alternatives available. Many of them believed if they had meaningful work or structure in their lives, then they would reduce or stop their drug use. However, job insecurity and low-paid, unstable work were common, alongside a long list of convictions which moved them further away from being able to be employed. And lack of control over their time created time stress. When I was reanalysing the data and recoding it, fighting and having nothing to do were consistently coded together during analysis. And that really emphasised the interrelationship between violence and boredom. Conflict ruptured time for participants. It removed the slowing down of time experienced in a bored state. And violence, the embodied control of physicality, was often the response to end the numbing pervasiveness of their lives to provide feelings of power. Do you want to go for a game of football? Aye, we'll go down and play football. What do you want to do now? Fuck it, we'll go and fight other time. We'll go and fight outsiders or whatever. It was just something to do, to be honest with you. Fighting for them was a buzz. It was a moment in time which they could transcend the present and live in the moment. And this isn't a new finding. The buzz, edge work, or the spectacular violence associated with gangs is where our academic gaze tends to focus, rather than theorising that symbolic interplay between buzz and boredom. And I'm not suggesting that fighting is merely a leisure experience. It's much more complex than that. In this research, fighting was a learned form of resilience. It was an emotional response to the structural and systemic disadvantages that they faced. That's also not to say that it wasn't an enjoyable experience for them, especially when participants were entering the gang. It was an activity that ruptured the present and ruptured the norm, and it was a means of enacting agency on the world through physical means. It allowed them to transcend the present or the problems in the present and live in the moment. So participants would engage in many risk-taking behaviours that would rupture the present, or as they put it, kill time. And this often resulted in them getting charged with offences, as a lot of the activities they engaged in had to be visceral to break the boredom. What was new was exploring what happens at the nexus of these two, boredom and the buzz, and what processes were occurring within gang members that resulted in a buzz. And for these participants, killing time was about embodying their agency. And I use Emma Beer's and Mish's understanding of agency that believes a person's agency is a temporally embedded process of social engagement. And this could be seen in their activities, their use of drugs and drink, their engagement in the buzz, and the avoidance of specific time markers. This embodiment was the use of the body as a representation of resistance against the structures that diminished their belief in agency. So for them, the killing of time was akin to rupturing the space-time present, removing markers of time and alleviating the time stress experienced. So for them, part of breaking the habit of boredom was the rupture of the norm, the breaking of time and present. It's just guff, means rubbish. We would sit in the cross and we would sit and smoke weed, right? And we would sit and smoke weed because we were bored. Then we'd all be sitting in the close, and you would get the ones that would terrorise the close. They would get mad with it in the close, break shit and all that, smashing windows and things, pure mindless violence. As this was a reanalysing of data, the focus was not fully on boredom, as when in a constructivist grounded theory I would normally have followed that through until saturation. So I didn't do that. So a definition or understanding of youth boredom didn't emerge from the participants. This study just provided a snapshot of what occurred at the nexus of boredom and crime for young people in gangs. It didn't explore whether other young people reacted this way to gangs, or if these visceral time ruptures that they engaged in were only gang coping mechanisms. So that I could understand it and to have a conceptually porous definition of boredom, I brought together existing literature on boredom from psychology, philosophy, sociology to try and create a definition of boredom. And understanding boredom as an emotion was really useful in that it considered the subjective element of boredom and emotions and the impact it can have on our moods, our emotions, but it also allowed for the social construction of boredom to emerge. And I think understanding boredom as a social emotion and allows for different components of boredom that are required to be included in it, that include the historical, cultural and structural factors that are faced. Because one of the things that came out of this study very much was that existential boredom resulted from the structures that they operated within. And we know that boredom is embedded in our social structures now. It's found within the mundane day-to-day of work. It's found in repetitive behaviours. Boredom was not just a feeling of emptiness or having nothing to do. Changes in our social structures, particularly for young people, such as technology and consumption, have further embedded boredom due to an overload of choices, and that large amount of information processed by individuals has sterilised and further withdrawn meaning. So this highlights an important factor that boredom is not just the experience of nothing to do. what causes boredom and part of its phenomenology is that the meaning we ascribe to situations or tasks. And temporality and the slowing of time is consistently referred to as part of that experience of boredom. And really importantly for this study, and something that my non-believer of boredom had never experienced, is that we experience boredom differently. So on the basis of reanalysing the old study regarding gang members, I wrote a paper that had that definition of boredom in it and explained the process that allowed their bored bodies to develop and what occurred at that intersection of boredom and crime or risk-taking for gang members. Following that, but also the lack of theoretical understandings of the link between boredom and crime, I approached the Royal Society of Edinburgh to get funding to carry out a study that looked at young people in the justice system and young people who had similar backgrounds, came from the same areas of disadvantage, but had no justice experience, because I wanted to see if I could find coping mechanisms that could be transferable and explore what boredom was and how it impacted young people in particular. So this study, the second study, Killing Time and Boredom, was carried out between 2022 and 2024. Boredom itself is difficult to discuss, difficult to describe. It's almost like asking people to define a ghost. So one of the methods that I wanted to use was collage. And all the pictures that you see, everything within this presentation has come from the created collages of young people that took part in the study. And using collage really allowed me to include marginalised voices and a range of linguistic and non-linguistic representations that helped articulate the lived experiences of boredom and the embodied and often kind of difficult to conceptualise aspects of boredom in non-verbal ways. Interestingly, talking about the sleep from earlier, so the lion in this collage represents lying down and going to sleep. I wanted to see if there was differences between young people in the justice system and their reactions to boredom and young people who were not in the justice system but had similar experiences growing up. So I had focus groups with young people in the justice system and then focus groups from young people who were in similar areas. So that included having focus groups within youth offending institutions, prisons, and young people who were on community justice orders. The youth work focus groups were a range of art-based youth groups, mental health youth group, a cyber youth group, an informal youth group and a sports youth group, because I also wanted to see whether or not their engagement in these different types of activities would affect whether or not they were their levels of boredom. And you'll also see as I go on in the presentation, I wanted another way of sharing the kind of profound experiences of boredom because their stories were so profound. So I created poems using the listening guide from the transcripts of the young people. And I did this because it's a method of centering participants' voice and how they view themselves within the world. So these are used to share the impact of boredom within young people's lives and are taken directly from participants' interview transcripts. So what did I find? Well, to be honest, many of the findings were the same, particularly in regards to the development of existential boredom. It took years to develop bored bodies. Nothing to do occurred over the space of years and built up in bodies, withdrawing meaning and fostering that feeling that they had lost agency or couldn't enact agency within the world. Nothing to do for them, and the development of bored bodies was almost like a part of their growing up. Their lives were intersected so that they believed that their agency was embodied within them due to them having nothing to do. And that process took years to develop, with lack of opportunity, lack of resources, lack of income and viable transitions for them. That's why they embody their responses to boredom, is they've learned that's the only agency that they can act. So nothing to do was much more extreme. especially for those in the justice system and within institutions, because the only control they had was over their body. And it was here that I could see the development of existential boredom, when people began to lose their belief in agency and they began to lose meaning in the activities they engaged in the lives that they lead. So this poem's by a young person in an institution. I'm like a grumpy muppet, I'm like a grumpy muppet, I'm like a grumpy muppet because I sit at my door with my legs crossed looking at the fucking... It's no because I'm depressed, I'm fucking bored, I've got nothing better. I've got nothing better to do with my time. I try and fill my time. I can't think of a time like, even before I came in here, when I wasn't bored, you know? Nothing to do or empty time's not just the absence of activities. There can be activities, but they lose meaning. Having nothing to do is also about that overabundance of activities that overwhelm young people. And nothing to do, importantly, occurs prior to boredom. It's the liminal space that young people enter before they're feeling bored, and it also results in a kind of like boredom paralysis. It's about entering a space or a thought process in their brains where they feel there's nothing meaningful to fulfill their time. The activities that they're engaging in have lost meaning, and they described when at the start, when they first start to feel this, if the right activity, event or connection occurs at that point of having nothing to do, then that existential boredom can be averted. Young people feel when they enter this state that they can't fill their time, and that's because they're experiencing existential boredom, which withdraws feelings of agency. Ben's poem here highlights how feelings of existential boredom withdraw their ability to break boredom or fill their time with meaningful activities, as when this type of boredom begins to emerge, it depletes their want or motivation to be able to do something, even though they desperately want to. Empty time was something to be feared for young people. Having nothing to do is a stigmatised state. And this overarching narrative of busyness within society, coupled with their internment, means that their self and social identities are under threat when they have nothing to do. This is because too much empty time creates boredom. It engages them in overthinking or results in excessive actions to break the boredom. They feel as if when they have empty time that they're wasting their time or they're wasted. When they said that they were bored, they meant there was no meaningful connections in their lives right now. And those who had complex backgrounds of deprivation, poor support networks, previous trauma and poor mental health discussed heightened experiences of boredom, which resulted in more extreme reactions in which to stop it. And this didn't just occur within the youth, the criminal justice group. This also occurred in the youth work data. They spoke of it less frequently, but it did occur more with young people who had complex backgrounds and those with fewer friendship groupings. Some of the young people in the justice system spoke about boredom bringing on mental health issues due to the feelings of isolation and likeliness to overthink. The aspect of having nothing to do or empty time, particularly in institutions, results in overthinking, as they have little control over space, time or activities, and they are typically on their own with no meaningful connections. Those that spoke of overthinking and experiencing destructive thoughts found that when they were having them, they could not control them. They would try and think about happy thoughts, but they were always replaced with negative thought processes and rumination over past and future events. They tended to go over past scenarios much more in their head, the things that they've done to be there, previous arguments, the people that they have lost, the impact of others on them being within prison or secure care. And the boredom and feelings of being overwhelmed would begin to spiral until the young person could no longer continue to be in that space. And then they would engage in destructive behaviour to break the boredom. And killing time referred to the point that people could no longer cope existing in the present. It was where their thought processes overtook them and they would do anything to break the boredom. It was when they engaged in visceral time ruptures that broke the present, that allowed it to be broken. And due to the developing of existential boredom over time and their lack of belief in external agency, the young people embodied their agency, which meant they engaged in visceral time ruptures that were embodied and involved drugs, alcohol, violence, humour, excitement seeking, self-harm, suicidal ideation, suicidal actions. It had to be something instant, something visceral, something that had instant meaning or lifted them above the present and that allowed time to pass. The first I poem here is by Billy, who discusses how in prison one of the main ways of killing time is in drug use, and how in 2021 there was Exilium in the prison, which is a form of benzos. So they would use that to cope with the ongoing pervasiveness of time and boredom. Fighting, violence, self-harm, robbing, they all instantly create meaning within their lives. And Elizabeth Goldstein discusses how conflict is an instant meaning-making process. It instantly creates meaning in the present, creating an us and a them, a conflict, a plan. It changes temporal orientation from the present into future orientation, or alleviates thoughts of time when they let go of social temporalities and rise above them, being fully embodied in the experience that they've created. And this second I poem captures the moment of escape from their present. It shows how their controlled loss of control is about killing time as an embodied response. People and institutions talked about how they had to learn how to do time, which was interestingly linked with their first time negative experiences, and is about how going through these experiences within prison and how the escalation of events for them worsens their situations. So they have to learn to accept that they have no agency, no choice, but to do it. They spoke of going through bad experiences first, being punished, the boredom and the loneliness escalating. And they had to learn to accept it, or sadly some do not. And I must highlight that those in the youth group also spoke of conflict as the main way of killing time and engaged in it in the same ways, but not to the same extent. Theirs tended to be verbal, while those in the justice system tended to be physical. That's not quite true because they talked about self-harm quite a lot in suicidal ideation and suicide. So they were physical, but when they tried to pick fights with people, it tended to be verbal or would engage with their parents or siblings, whereas those in the justice system tended to be about picking fights with strangers. So Spending's typology of existential boredom didn't fully fit because it wasn't about accepting it. It wasn't about being in that depressive, disconnected state. It was about breaking it. It was about destroying it. So that was why I added an extra typology of boredom for youth boredom, that of destructive boredom. And destructive boredom really emerges when a person's lapped into the type of existential boredom, but occurs with the type of emotion that they are feeling. So when they're angry or frustrated, they're bored and these feelings begin to escalate. They begin to ruminate and overthink past or future scenarios going over traumatic events in their heads. And it doesn't happen immediately. They get bored first. They try and fill their time. But if they can't get that meaningful activity or connection, then boredom takes hold and they begin to overthink. And the strength of these emotions are so overwhelming that they will literally do anything to stop the boredom and engage in destructive behaviours designed to break the present. And the consequences of their actions aren't considered because it's a moment of release from those intense feelings of boredom where all thoughts or consequences or worries are left behind, and the behaviours they engage in are visceral and designed to rupture or change their present moment. I think I've run out of time.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, I thought that I'd run out of time. So basically a new definition of youth boredom was developed that included loss of connection and destructive boredom. And then will I stop sharing my screen?
Okay, so thank you very much for this presentation. I just read your paper. It was quite interesting as well. Okay, do we have any questions to Johanne? Okay, so I don't know, it is, okay, Stanley, please.
Congratulations, Johanne. Very nice presentation. Well, I'm just beginning my journey in boredom studies, and I am very interested in this existential variety. But when I think of it, it seems to me that it's never, when we're talking about and considering this existential variety, it's never just boredom. It is always combined with other things like, I don't know, I'll write it here. Some guilt about life expectations being unmet, or frustration, or guilt for not being happy, or shame for not being productive, or sad for not being happy. So existential boredom is always associated with other feelings, or other emotions, while the situation aspect of the phenomenon uh, can be alone. You can think, for instance, a person says to you, "Oh, I was bored last week." This person might be healthy, she's happy, she's engaged with her life, but she was just feeling bored. But in the case of existential boredom, it is always something else. So, what do you think of it?
Of what in particular? Sorry, Stanley. Of existential boredom, or
Yes,
I think it.
existential, because when you consider the situation aspect of the phenomenon, I can think of a situation where a person just feel bored, nothing else. Okay, but when you speak about the existential aspect, oh, someone is existentially bored. She, my question is she just bored, or there's something else?
I think it's about where. So I think situational boredom really is kind of constructive. It can be either negative or positive. Like you can experience situational boredom, and it makes you sad for a short period of time, or you go or it drives you to creativity. You'll go read a book. You'll go do these things. I think, and that's the kind of boredom. Like, oh, I was bored last week. But I think existential boredom makes you question your very being, your very purpose within life. And I actually think it's a really important bit to be taken apart, because I do even question whether meaning making is hegemonic. We have hegemonic understanding. Are we talking about value? Are we talking about purpose? Are we talking, what are we actually talking about there? But all of these things are part of that existential boredom. You have lost your ability to care about something, or believe that no one cares about you. And I think existential boredom, and something that I really struggled with in this study, in both the studies, was what's the difference between existential boredom and depression or mental health, because they spoke about them in the same way. And I don't think someone saying, "Oh, I was bored last week," says that. It doesn't bring on the same state, or emotions or feelings, or questioning of self and placement within the world. So I think it's about that. And I found it quite difficult carrying out this research, because asking a young person in prison about meaning, where's your meaning in life? Well, where do you? And it had to be about who cares about you, who do you care about, what. So I found it, to be honest, I find it conceptually difficult, and I think it should be conceptually difficult, which hasn't answered your question, I understand, but I think that's probably for greater minds than mine. But yeah, I see it as you losing your sense of self in the social. So I would, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, we can say that this is a compound phenomenon. Yeah, this existential boredom, especially that this is a mood, not the emotion. Emotion is more concrete, and mood. Yeah, you can combine different things in a mood. Yeah. Uh, Okay, and this is a nice part of your paper and now presentation, that you can accumulate situational boredoms. Yeah, if this is accumulation of these boredoms, you can manufacture, let's say, existential boredom in one. Yeah, that this is not that, oh, you should be start to be a philosopher or something like this. Yeah, but this is profound. But this is, yeah, very banal in the structure. Yeah, So this is a banality of, I don't know, boredom, I suppose. Yeah, taking into consideration the Hannah Arendt concept of banality of evil. Yeah, this is not that you must be a mastermind of murdering people. Yeah, this is just you can be a bureaucrat. Yeah, you can be bored. Yeah, this is a free killing, something like this in criminology. Yeah, so maybe existential boredom is profound, but it is banal in its etiology, I suppose. Yeah, and this was nice in your paper, yeah, that you could accumulate those very mundane boredom into something serious. Yeah, with serious consequences as well.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it's very structural in the lives of the young people who I researched. Like, it's very structural. But I think I set out in the second study thinking that I would find coping mechanisms that I could share with those in the justice system. And I didn't find that. They were having the same experiences. Their experience was almost like a scale. They weren't as extreme, and they were much more inward. So there was a lot more self-harm, a lot more suicidal ideation on the youth work side of it, whilst on the criminal justice side of it was quite external. The reactions were very external and were in a mental well-being way, not in a societal way, were probably healthier reactions than those within the youth work groups. Which is very sad. It's one of the saddest studies that I've done. And I do a lot of studies about gangs and young people losing their lives. And this is probably one of the saddest studies I've done, because it's about that loss of connection for young people as well.
Okay, so let's stop it here. Thank you very much. And maybe we would be in a better mood after the next presentation.